So under Learn, the module under hacking is DVWA, Down Vulnerable Web Application, and this is the content we're going through. We've already set up Debian. You can take a look at some of this content here. Setting up Debian. Oh, I don't that one. We don't do phpMyAdmin anymore, for good reason. I don't know why I selected the wrong one, but whatever. We don't use phpMyAdmin, so this one really doesn't help us. The document is mislabeled. We do not do phpMyAdmin. We just set up Linux, and then we set up Apache, and we then set up PHP, and then the Mariah database server. And then we configure our environment to properly allow database connections. In the past, we actually used phpMyAdmin, but as we'll see with our attacks, it is often a vector of attack that opens you up to risk. phpMyAdmin not properly configured can allow people to try and gain access. And if you allow root access through phpMyAdmin, you're basically allowing root access to the database. Now, it's a different root than the file system or the operating system root. Nevertheless, it is the, for lack of a better term, hand of God access to the database server software, which is always dangerous. Recent versions of Debian have actually disabled the ability to install phpMyAdmin because it's such a risky thing. We can get around it, but if we're going to talk about setting up a secure environment, we should do it in a manner that mitigates against those kinds of risks. Having said that, we're going to introduce all other kinds of risks when we set this up, but we'll deal with those as we come across them. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to set up our software, and then we're going to take a look at the process of deploying an application to our environment. And the application we're going to deploy is, of course, DVWA. It's a couple of steps. The first one is a do once setup, where you need to set up the file system. I talk about all the different ways you can do this to address security, and then we're going to take a look at the one that I want us to use. And that basically changes the file system to allow group www data to update the file system, and then we're going to add ourselves to that group. We are basically going to add us to the group that can modify that directory structure. Okay? It introduces other kinds of risk, but for a development environment, it is a pretty good, secure way of setting it up. Nothing is perfect at this point. Okay? Security is always a trade-off. And then we create a database and then start configuring our app to make sure that it is working. Okay? I also talk about a process of creating a file share using Virtualbox in this document. If you want to move files on and off, if you want to, don't have to do that. That is just for your information. If you want to set up a Virtualbox share, I have the instructions here. We're going to do everything through secure SCP or secure FTP. We don't need to set up the Virtualbox share. If you want to, by all means, take a look at it. Okay? So that's what we're going to do next by way of introduction. First things we need to do is to set up our network. If you take a look at your current network settings, and you might have to zoom in a little bit to see my work, you see that we have ENP0S3 working. We do not have an IP address set for ENP0S8. There are two possible settings for this. Let's first take a look at the legacy one. ETC network, IN interfaces. And when we take a look at the contents, it tells us exactly what is in that file. There is another file we will probably see when we look at Ubuntu, specifically Kali, called netplan, and then 00 config, something like that. We'll see that later on. That's the new way of doing network management. We're kind of in this transitional space in the Linux world. Most Linuxes have gone over to the net command rather than the IP commands, or the IF commands. You do the IP commands versus the IF commands. Whatever. We're in this transitional. Debian always lags the rest of the world when it comes to these things. It's one of the reasons that I like it. They don't just jump on a new system until they're convinced it is worth jumping on. Ubuntu has gone with the new system, And we'll see that when we're setting up our Kali in the future. But right now, we still have to use this old interfaces setup. So that's what we're going to do. I'm logged in as root. That is good because I need to change the system, so I need to be root. So you can use Vi or you can use Nano. If you've not used Vi, if you don't know how to use Vi, do not use Vi. You will see me default to Vi because that's the first text editor I learned when I first learned Linux in the 90s. That was the really, Vi and Emacs were the options, and I fell in the Vi path, and that's what I use. Okay, but there is a text editor.
The correct path.
Thank you. There is a text editor called Nano, which you can use to modify, and the file we want to modify is etc, and tab is your friend. net tab / tab, and then you just keep hitting tab and it'll recommend stuff, right? I can type int tab and it auto completes the file interfaces for me. So again, how did I get there? Nano space / etc / net tab / int tab, and it auto completes the proper file name that we need to modify. Hit enter and your screen should look like this. If you hit enter and the file is blank, you have specified the wrong file name. All right. If I type something like this and I see a blank screen like that, I've done something wrong. Control key, use the control key on the left side of your keyboard because chances are the control key on the right side of your keyboard is owned by Virtualbox. So left control X to exit out. And then try the command again. Nano etc sorry, let's type it in properly, / etc / net tab / int tab. It should autocomplete for you, and it should look something like that. Are there any questions? What we want to do is we want to replicate the settings we have here to set up a new interface card. Now we could set it to a static IP, but we're not going to do that. Okay, we're just going to use DHCP. I've done static in the past. What we need to do, DHCP is fine. If you want to see static, there's lots of instructions. Just keep in mind that you don't need two gateway configurations. You end up confusing the network environment. You've already got a gateway configuration with your NAT adapter. Do not set a gateway address with your host-only adapter. You've already got the gateway set. So if you're going to use static, just set an IP address, a network size, or a net mask, and you should be good. All right? Regardless, I'm going to set up a host-only network. Just basically going to copy what I see above. Hash to comment the line, and this is going to be the host-only network. And identify myself. Obviously, I don't need to worry about this in my personal environment, but every time your instructors have told you to comment your code, they tell you that for a reason. It is something you really should be doing. The same thing applies to config files. I'm changing the configuration. I'm identifying myself as the person who made that change and why. Okay? Allow -hotplug enp0s8. All right? The last time was ep0s3. This time it's enp0s8. And spelling matters. Allow -hotplug enp0s8. I face enp0s8. I cannot type today. inet DHCP. You could also, as I say, set it to static, and then on the next line, give it an address with a /24 to specify the net mask or the network size. Outside of scope for this class, if you want to, feel free to play with it. Okay? DHCP is fine for what we need to do. Once I have that, left Control O to save my file, enter. If it gives you an error, you're not logged in as root. You're changing a system file, you need to be root. And then Control X to exit. Sanity check, cat, etc, net tab, int tab. And you should see your addition to that file. Any questions? Okay. You can use the IF command.
Sorry, I actually do have one question.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
I must have missed when you logged into root. What is the command to switch to root again?
SU space dash. The command looks like this. SU dash, and then whenever you do that, it prompts you for the root password. And that is, for me, it is password. Okay. Now.
Sorry, Stephen, can you go back to that other screen that you were on so I can get those settings?
Yep.
I'm just a bit behind.
That's fine.
Try not to interrupt.
That's why I'm doing this. If I was worried about you guys getting behind, or if I wasn't worried about it, I would just say, hey, look at the video, figure it out. I want this set up properly because this is the foundation of at least half of the stuff that we're going to do in this class. So you got to get it right. Okay? Maybe a half is a little exaggerated, but it is very important. This VM we do a lot of work on, and I want you to get it set up properly, so let's take the time. While you're looking at that, some of you are aware of the sudo command, and you can often use the sudo command to act as root without actually becoming root. And there's value in that, but sudo is not set up in this environment. Okay? In a production world, I would probably have you set up sudo and only use sudo. Again, there's this balance between the two, and I really have to focus on what I want to cover, and setting up sudo isn't one of the things I want to take time to cover. It's not that hard. Install and use sudo, modify the sudoers file. We'll see the sudoers files in some of our activities to allow whatever your user ID to act as root, or set up an admin group and add that user to the admin group. All of those are fine implementations of the sudoers file. I don't bother with it in Debian. And, there's nothing wrong with it, but sometimes sudo introduces vulnerabilities as well if it's not properly configured. So again, you don't want to add anything that, strictly speaking, isn't necessary. Sudoers might be an exception to that, but again, we will see some exploits using the sudo system. So I'm kind of back and forth on that one, but I've fallen on the side of not bothering to set it up. Okay. Jeremy, did that work for you? Sorry, Jared, did that work for you?
Yeah, I'm good now. I think I'm caught up.
Okay. All right, so Control X. And now the next thing we want to do is, because we still don't have our adapter working, so you can do if up enp0s8. And it should bring it online after a little bit of discovery. IP adder, and you should see now you've got two adapters, enp0s3 and enp0s8. You should have two adapters there, and you should be good to go. Okay? Again, the command I typed in is, you can use the cup cursor, if up enp0s8. You could also use the IP command, IP link set enp0s8 up or something like that. I can never remember the IP command, but it's IP link set enp whatever up. That would probably work. Again, we're in this transitional phase, so the if up command still works. We're still using the if config file. Let's make our lives a little bit easier. All right. The pure sanity check that you want to do, logged in as root, type in the reboot command and see if your VM will reboot properly and have the proper network configuration. That is really the ultimate sanity check. If you reboot Debian, and do an IP adder, and it shows that you've got an IP address set for your adapter as well as the old IP for your old NAT adapter, you're good to go. Is everybody at this point?
Yeah, reboot was good.
Awesome. Okay, at this time, as you can see, I use this a lot. I use this a lot. I haven't cleaned it up in a while, clearly. You do not have to do this. No, I'll do it later. But I'm going to, so that you can see what I'm doing a little bit more easily without having to focus in and squint as what I'm doing in my terminal window. I am going to set up a new connection. We will be setting this up together in class. Okay? You guys are section 2. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to open it up. I'm going to accept the key yes, and this is what I'm doing here. And if I try logging in as root, even with the correct credentials, it's not going to let me, because you never want to allow remote connections via root. Okay? So we have to do it as the regular ID that you created before. And that's why we save it. I'm going to log in as SJ, and then my password, which was generic, I think, and then become root, which is going to be my default. All right. Now, why am I doing this? First of all, I use PuTTY so that I can get into a screen that is easier for you to read. Like that. Can everybody make that out clearly?
Yep.
No? I can make
Oh, yeah,
it a
it's
bit.
good.
Yeah. Yeah? Okay. Well then, because I can always go up a little bit more, right? But I can always make it like size 20. Regardless, once I've done that, I need to go back, select that, and save it. And then apply it. And then it's a little easier to read. Also, I can then make my screen full size, and I can use my mouse. One of the big benefits of using PuTTY. You can't use your mouse in the terminal. You can't. You also can't copy and paste. For example, if I highlight the text that I had earlier in Notepad, I can copy that and I can paste it by right-clicking. That option is not available here. I can't use a mouse, and there's no paste option that's really available to me. Keyboard. Yeah, there's really no paste option, I don't think. But I have to have my terminal running before I do anything else. So I always, I can't PuTTY into a machine that isn't running. So I fire up Debian, and then right away I fire up PuTTY so you guys can follow along more easily with what I want to do in class. Okay? Any questions on any of that? You don't need that. We will be setting this up when we take a look at encryption in a few weeks. We will set up keyless authentication and access to our environment. Okay? Any questions? We will, however, need to set up WinSCP. And I should have, you should download WinSCP and install it if you haven't already done so. I should have tasked you with that. I didn't think of that. I apologize. But definitely go ahead and install WinSCP in your environment. The one I want you to use is winscp.net. Go to the downloads page and just copy, or I should say download the most recent version of WinSCP. Obviously in your host environment, I've added a link to the chat. I have an older version. It just works. Filezilla, Jared.
Can you hear me? Is it okay if I just use my terminal?
It's okay if you use your terminal, but you have to use the get and put commands in the secure FTP. If you're happy with that, I'm happy with it.
Okay.
You're going to be moving entire directories up and down, probably. So you do you.
Cool.
I don't care. If you're looking for a graphical tool, For the Mac world, I usually recommend people use Filezilla. It seems to work well enough, and it is free as well.
Is it okay if I use CyberDuck for the graphical user interface then?
I'm not familiar with that, but if it's a tool that you're comfortable, by all means, go ahead. At this point, and actually it's a really good question, Jared, I'm showing you how to do it, but I want you to know what needs to be done, and you do it. If you want to use Filezilla in the PC world, that's fine as well. We're going to be uploading in multiple files. We're going to be uploading like directories and stuff like that. So you can do files one at a time. You can use command line tools, but we need to upload stuff to this environment. So we might as well, pick something and that works and use it. But if you've got something that works for you, by all means, please use it. Please use it. Okay? Great question, Joe. Any other questions? Okay. Once we have our IP address understood, for me it's 56.215. We need to specify that as a new site. So if you've already got WinSCP set up and you've already got a bunch of sites, as you can see, I use this all the time. Specify a new site, don't use one of the existing sites. And you can call it whatever you want, but again, you have to use the right host name, or in our case, IP address. For me, as I said, it's 215 on the 56 network. If your host-only network is set up properly, it's going to be, or set up by default, and hasn't been misconfigured or reconfigured, it's probably the 56 network. And I started at 100, and I'm already up to IP address 215. I use Virtualbox a lot, okay? The username is non-root account that we set up before. For me, it's SJ, and the password is generic. And you can save that. And when you save it, you probably want to save the password and click on OK so that you can log in. And again, you need to accept the keys. These systems use encryption. These encryptions have key to guarantee a unique implementation of that encryption as unique as possible. So accept the key and click on yes, and you should have connection. Okay? Because we're going to upload some stuff to our site. Is everybody at this point? Are there any questions?
I'm good. I'm caught up.
All right. Perfect. Thank you. Now, we've finished with the setting up. Oh, we haven't finished with the setting up, but we've got our network in place. The next thing I talk about in the content is a throwback to the old days when you used a single CD-ROM to install everything. Sometimes you need to comment out the file that looks for the CD-ROM content. We tend not to worry about that anymore. If you go to install software and it says, hey, I'm checking out the CD, go into this document and comment out the call for the CD-ROM, save and exit. At the end of the day, we tend not to need it. Before we install, even though we just did a clean install and we're pretty up to date, anytime I install software, I do an apt update and an apt upgrade before I install anything. Okay. Now I can start building my AMP stack. First thing I'm going to do is apt install Apache 2. Okay. It is going to say, for me, it's going to say I need to download a bunch of stuff. There's some optional stuff, but this is what I'm going to install. It's going to download almost 3 meg of files, and once it's done, it's going to take about 10 meg of drive space. Do you want to continue? You can hit Y and enter. Y. So that's the first thing we want to do is apt install Apache 2. It's only a 3 meg download. It should happen very, very quickly regardless of your internet connectivity. It's a very, very, very fast process. And now we want to start testing. Now this is overkill. but I don't care. This is the kind of thing that you need to do when you're setting up a production environment. The first thing I want to do is make sure Apache is working as expected. So I want to test it. The easiest way to do that is to install a command line browser that will test it for me. The next thing I want to install is Lynx, L-Y-N-X. Say yes and let it install. And it will install a command line browser for you. All right. Are there any questions on that? Does that make sense? Once it is installed, you can do Lynx. Lynx will open up a basic command line browser, Q to quit. You can Lynx localhost, and it should load up the Debian default page. It might not look my screen. My screen is a little bit bigger, and you may or may not have color displayed through your terminal. I have color displayed here. It's one of the nice things about it. Okay? But that is a command line browser. And if you want, you can say, Lynx localhost G to go to a site. And you can type in google.com if you want to see what Google looks like. It'll ask you if you want to save cookies, A for always, so you don't have to say yes all the time. And then that's what Google looks like without any of its graphics. And you can actually tap over and search for something. I can search for fly fishing in Manitoba. And tab over or enter a couple of times. And again, yes. And that is what fly fishing, that's what my buddy's fly fishing site in Manitoba looks like without any of the graphics. The important thing is to go and make sure localhost is working, that it loads the default Apache page, and you can queue to quit. If you say no, it's really happy when you say no. If you say queue, no, I don't want to quit, it likes that you want to stay in it, which I think is a cute little thing. But queue to quit, and that's what we want to test. So we've installed software, and we've verified that it's working. Now let's verify that our network is configured properly as well. IP adder to verify. Again, the IP address of my host-only network, my machine on the host-only network is 215. Because we set up the promiscuous mode properly, I can now navigate to that in my host environment. I can open up a new window. I have way too much crap open here. And I can go to that site. For me, the IP address is 215. And when I open it up, again, I'll load the Apache default page. Now, your thoughts are, is like, big whoop, this is nothing. But again, we're doing a production deployment, and you want to test stuff, and you don't want to be messing around with what isn't and isn't working. What isn't working. And this is the kind of thing that I want you to keep in mind. I'm doing something, I'm testing it, it worked properly. Let's move on to the next thing, test that. All right? Are there any questions? Let's move on. The next thing we want to install is PHP and then setting up the Mariah database server. Okay? So let's carry on with that. Apt Install PHP. It should find that you want to install the latest one. It should be PHP 7. It would be easier for us if we used PHP earlier versions, but we're not going to do that. We're trying to set up a hardened environment, so let's set up the correct one. We're going to use the default, which in this case is 7.3. Enter. It'll go out, it'll grab the necessary components, and it will install PHP for us. Again, you need to do this as root. Once PHP is installed, you can then apt install Mariah. And let it go through and do the installation as well. Are there any questions?
Not yet.
No? Okay. I think something is missing. I think something is missing. Oh well, we'll see.
Sorry, what was the Mariah that we wanted to install?
MariahDB-server.
Thank you.
Not a problem. Anybody else? Are there any questions? Okay, so we're basically done with the first document, which is setting up our environment in a very basic manner. We're not using, as I said, we're not using phpMyAdmin. That document is mistitled. What we are using, however, is we'll talk about that later. Yeah, what we are going to use, and I'll just show you this now so you can see it. We're going to use this tool here, Sql Manager, to manage database connections, but we won't see this just yet. We'll see this later on when we set up the StungEye blog software. But this SQL Manager Lite from MySQL, which of course is basically the same thing as the Mariah database, this is the database management tool. This is going to replace what we needed to do in the past using phpMyAdmin. Of course, we can do everything through the terminal, but it's a little easier for us to go through a graphical environment to manage our database and do things like add and remove columns. Well, we're not going to remove columns, but add columns and set some default data types and default content. And we'll see this towards the end of the semester when we actually go through and do a proper hardened login system, access control systems, and put some brute force mitigation and other hardening activities at the end of the semester. So we will be using a database management front-end tool at that point. But right now, we're just going to set up our database in the command line. So if you haven't already done so, load the document learned that talks about deploying a web application to Debian. Okay, and we're just going to go through and talk about this. At the end of the day, what we need to do is we need to post content to this directory here, this HTML directory, all right? I'm in the var www directory, and this HTML directory is what's called the document root of our Apache web server. And we want to push content to it. Unfortunately, when we do an ls-l, we see the permissions are such that only the root and members of the root group actually, not even the root group, only root can post stuff to that document. We've also seen that we can't log in remotely as root. Now, we could go in and change the remote access configuration Debian to allow that. I'm pretty sure we can still do that, but that is considered a really bad idea. You should never allow remote root access on any of your stuff. It's just a really bad idea. So we're not going to do that. Okay? We could push our stuff to our home directory and then copy that stuff over using the terminal, but that's tedious. We're going to be going through files, and I'll show you right now. We are going to go into files in this var www HTML, and we're just double-click and modify them right here. Okay? For example, if I wanted to edit the index file and I want to say something, well, wait a minute, before I do that, I think this has bitten me in the ass. It shouldn't. So if I want to change this file, just give me something to change. I'm just going to add Stephen J. based. And when I click on save and I go back to my WinSCP, it throws an error because I don't have permissions to be modifying this stuff. Because of course I don't. I'm not logged in as root. Same thing applies to the directory structure and all of that. Consequently, we need to come up with something that'll allow us to, I need to save that. I need to keep that. Yeah, don't worry about that. We're having problems with another site. It's outside of the college. Don't worry about that. Okay? I don't even know where are we. Here we go. That's what I want open. Okay, so this block at the bottom of page 1 of the handout talks about some of the tools that we can use. And they all have their pluses and minuses, all right? Some of them is you can do some group permissions, setting the group ID. It opens up some other vulnerabilities. You can allow users to upload by setting the permissions that anybody can push content to it. That opens up vulnerabilities. I mean, the easiest fix in all of this, we could just do this. I could do the change mod 777 and let anybody upload to that directory. That's dangerous, and I don't want you doing that. Okay? What we're going to do is something a little different. We're going to set the permissions for that directory to 775. We're going to allow a group to change the content of that directory. All right? And that directory is HTML, of course. So now that I'm doing ls-al, anybody who's part of the group ownership can modify that directory. That's step 1. The step 2 is we need to change what group owns that. Currently, the root user owns it and the root group owns it. We want to change that ownership. To the www-data group. The www-data user and group are the default user and group that are created when you deploy Apache to your environment. Now, it is risky to do this because now the web Apache process can write to that directory. So that introduces other kinds of vulnerabilities. As I said before, it's very difficult to come up with a perfect solution. This is a development environment, and we're thinking critically of security. We understand it. We can accept that risk and move on. Okay? And again, so we're changing the ownership, not of the owner, but of the group owner to www-data, and that is the HTML item as well. So now, when I do an ls-al, www-data group has access to write to that directory. Okay? The third command is usermod. That's it. -a -g, and you need to add u. I'm just going to check. I always screw up that command. Oh, we can use the user add. Let's use the user add command. So it follows the node. We can use the user mod. SJ to www-data. Is that right? Okay, well, add user. That's why it's not working. It's not user add, it's add user. That makes sense. Let's go and see if that works. Well, we'll try it and see if it works. It seems to have worked. So there were 3 steps that we did. Let's itemize them over here in our little lecture thing. We changed mod of var www HTML of, and the change mod we did was 775. Okay? That was the first thing we did. We changed the owner of the, again, var www-html. We changed the owner to root-www-data. It really can be any group that we want to use. You can create a custom group. You can create a group of web developers. You could a group called web dev. You could have given that group ownership, and then you could add your user ID to that group. The problem is that the Apache user at some point I'm going to need to make some configuration changes to this environment. So sometimes it's easier for us in this class to let the data also make changes to that folder system. Okay, like I said though, it can introduce vulnerabilities. At this point, the Apache server process can change that file system, and that can be risky depending on what you have deployed. There are examples of software in Learn that you can take a look at. There's Joomla and WordPress. They need to be able to change that file system in that directory point, and they need to do that as the web server process. So that's kind of why I have that example set up like this, because there are times we need to do that. Okay? Any questions? Finally, a bit of a sanity check. No, I'm not. We're going to assume that everything's done properly. What I want to do now is I want to upload a file. The easiest way to do this is to go into this directory, create a new file, and we're going to call this test.php. And we need to save it. Like that, save it. And if you go back, I'm going to throw an error. The reason is because we need to refresh.
Yeah, I got the same error. Permission denied.
It needs to review that we have access to that directory. So let's try that again. Because it doesn't know that we have permissions. So we'll go in there and we'll try creating a new file again. Yeah, me too.
Same error.
Yeah, I know. It's hit and
I'm not
miss.
getting
It
there.
is hit and miss
Yeah,
for
I'm also
whatever
not getting
reason.
there.
So, well, let's do this. If you're having errors, do the following. Exit right out, become your regular user. Okay? Var www html pwd, I'm in the right directory. I'm a regular user, touch test.php. One sec. One second, the teeth. Have I forgotten something? Well, this is peculiar.
I was able to run the touch test.php and it worked for me.
Yeah, but it's not working for me, and I don't understand why. I logged out and I logged back in and it worked. That's peculiar. Okay, maybe it's because I'm doing it through PuTTY. I don't know. Regardless, that worked. Okay. If you're having problems, try logging out and logging back in. At the end of the day, you want to be able to create a file in that directory. And you need to be able to do it not as root. That's the test. If you can create a file, whether through the terminal or through WinSCP, that is the test. Okay? New file, test.php. It should. Okay, we'll. And you can update the content, but this has to work. If this doesn't work, then we have a problem. So I'm going to, again, oh, I wonder if it's because I had a bunch of stuff cached up there. Maybe that was it. I'm going to exit out, connect again, and then I have to be able to create something through WinSCP. And now it works. Okay, so there's some weird session stuff happening there. So log out, log back in, close down WinSCP, start it up again, and you should be fine. Okay? Because you need to be able to upload and create stuff through your file transfer tool. Okay? Why it wasn't working? Joy's teaching IT. Finally, if I didn't screw up the PHP command, we can now test and make sure that our PHP is actually working properly as well. And one of the things we want to make sure is that it is loading the correct database drivers, which I didn't see. Okay, MySQLi, I don't think the MySQLi driver is installed, so we might need to install that next. But again, this is a simple sanity check. We can see what our configuration is. In a production environment, once I've done this, I would delete it right away. But we'll see. Okay? I apologize for all that confusion, but let's move forward. Is everybody now at this point where through their WinSCP or whatever file transfer utility they're using, they can create content like a directory or a temporary file? Anybody nod at this point? Okay. What we want to do now is deploy DVWA. Back in Learn, I have a link for the DVWA master. It's a zip file. Please go ahead and download that file at this time. It's not that big. It's only a few kilobytes. Oh, it's 1.3 meg. And then you could open up that file. Okay. Of course, I prefer not using the Windows zip utility. I actually prefer to open with 7-zip. I prefer 7-zip. It's faster. I think you should get into the habit of using 7-zip. You can download 7-zip from 7zip.com or .org or whatever it is. Regardless of whatever you want, open up that zip file, that DVWA master, so that we can unarchive it and push it to our desired environment. I've got a directory that I call working that I use for this kind of stuff, and I'm going to unarchive that file to that environment. And I'm going to call it DVWA, all lowercase. Okay? And what you want to do then is you want to move all those files in that DVWA folder to WinZip. Or, if you want, delete the directory you created and just drag the directory. Either one is fine. it should allow you to do it, and it should be quite quick. Even though unzipped, it's a little bit more than that 1.3 meg. If you have your environment set up properly, and that's why we went through all of that and verified before we tried. This is why we verified. Actually, I would like to say that that was part of my lesson, is that all those problems were to show you the importance of verifying. No. When you're setting up a server for production environment, you verify every step of the way so that you are assured that what you're doing makes sense. Because if it doesn't work, then you know why. I'm pretty sure I have a problem with my database driver files. We're going to deal with that next. And I knew that by setting up the test PHP file. I had problems with my permissions. Maybe I didn't, maybe I just needed to restart stuff, but I tested it, I figured it out, I made sure it was working, and then I was able to move forward. Do you guys have a class right away after this?
I have something to do after this.
Okay, then we'll wrap this up very soon. At this point, you should have the DVWA system in place, but we're not quite done yet. We still need to create a database. Let's do that. Okay. What we need to do is we need to log in as root into the MySQL system as root. I'm at the bottom of page 2 of the handout, getting into page 3. Okay. So let's do that now. Go back to your terminal or your terminal tool, and first off, verify you are who you think you are. I am not root, so I need to become root. Perfect. Perfect. Now I can start MySQL. As user, root. And it didn't prompt me as a password. That's good. The first thing I want to do is create a database. You can call the database anything you want, but whatever you call it must match the configuration for the application. Sometimes things simple makes your life more simple. I'm going to create a database called DVWA. I'm going to create a user called DVWA, and I'm going to use the password DVWA for that user. We would never do that in a production world. We would use obscurity, and we sure as hell wouldn't use the same string for all three. But again, this is a little bit of a dev world thing, so we're okay. So first thing, create database DVWA. First, use DVWA. So I can now go into it, and it shows that I'm in the DVWA database. All right. Actually, I don't really need to do that. I don't need to use the DVWA, but that's okay. The next thing we want to do is create a user, and I'm going to follow the commands here. All right. We're going to grant all permissions or all privileges on the DVWA database to the DVWA user connected through localhost identified by a password string. And in this case, the password string is DVWA again. You want to type that in and use it. Or if you're lucky like me, you can paste it using the PuTTY terminal. It's one of the reasons I use PuTTY, is that I can copy and paste in and out of it, because as you've seen, I don't always type the most elegantly. Okay? And now I should have a user called DVWA with a password DVWA that has access to do everything on the DVWA database. At this point, I always flush privileges. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Oh, sorry. I was going to ask a question, then I answered it myself, and I forgot to unmute
Perfect.
myself.
That's fine. It's all good. Okay. So now I've got the user, the password, the database. Do I need to flush privileges? Maybe not. It will at some point catch up to me. But every time I alter privileges in MySQL or Mariah, I immediately flush the privileges to make sure that those privileges are in place right away. It's just one less thing to worry about. All right? It's a really good habit to get into. It will eventually figure it out. This does it right away. All right? So I've got my database created. I've got a user and a password set up. I've got my directory called DVWA. I've already dragged it over, but I can also go into the config here and change it. Or I can, and I'm just going to show you this, I can go back into my config here, and it's looking for a file called config. So yeah, I don't know why I closed it, but let's do this again. All right. Open up that folder in your browser. Okay. I'll just do this here in Notepad again. Point your browser to your IP address of your Debian and go to DVWA. And right away it says, I'm missing a file. And it tells us what to do. Copy this file to the config.inc.php and configure it for your environment. Perfect. Nice and straightforward. We have the file here, right-click, duplicate it, and we're just going to call it config.inc.php. The default is fine. It creates the file for us. Again, the graphical FTP tool that you use can do a lot of these things. We could just as easily have done it through the terminal. Okay? I don't care what you do, or how you do it, I should say. All I care is that you now have a file called config.inc.php.
Did you
right-click.
duplicate?
Yes, I did. So let's do that again. Select the file, right-click, and select duplicate in WinSCP. In the other tools, I'm not sure, but there should be a way of creating or duplicating a file. Select duplicate and give it the name config.inc.php. Delete the .dist so that you now have a file. Now you can right-click and edit the file. You can set this thing up to use other editors. It's done through the configuration. I don't have time for that right now, but I'm going to edit it here, all right? And it looks something like this. The server is localhost, the database is DVWA, the user is DVWA, and the password is DVWA. We could just as easily have done those settings here to match this configuration, or we do our configuration here and change the configuration to match that configuration. I don't care as long as your configuration for the application matches the configuration that you just set up for your database. And this is, of course, the database connection information. All right? Save that. Make sure that it uploads properly. Perfect. And then we can go in here and see if this works. And it doesn't. Okay? And I'm pretty sure it's because it's missing the MySQL driver. And we tell this because this is why we test as we go along. When we take a look, there is no MySQL driver. It talks about it, but doesn't actually talk about it being set up. So I don't think the MySQL driver is in place. So why don't we add that? We're done with the database, /q to quit our MySQL, and apt install php-mysqli. It will go through and will install the MySQL driver.
Sorry, I just missed the command to close out of the database. Is it just close?
Okay, /q. /q. It's right here, sir. It's this one right there.
Is there any difference between using the /q and just typing exit, or they do the same
None.
thing?
They basically do the same thing, but I want you to, from a instructional point, I want you to get into the habit of thinking Q to quit, because so many tools that we use, Q to quit. The less and the more commands, Q to quit. A lot of stuff is Q to quit, so as much as possible I encourage people to use that Q to quit so it becomes a default. But you are correct, whoever said that, you can also use exit. But I want you to try using Q to quit, all right? So we're going to do an apt install php mysqli and see if that doesn't solve our dilemma. I've done that. It seems to have installed it. I'm going to then try my login page again. And it still isn't working. It shouldn't actually take me to login. It should take me to install. No, setup. Okay, so if you do setup, it still doesn't have the PHP module for MySQL. Okay, one thing that was missing is you need to restart Apache. And this is why we test. Service, Apache 2, restart. Okay. This is what, Jesus, what is it now? Since the mid-'80s, I've been playing with computers. So what is that? 35 years I've been playing with computers. This is what 35 years of playing with computers looks like. Each release is a little bit different, but that's okay. We can work around it. What was missing was the PHP MySQLi. What I failed to do was to restart Apache after I installed that. I would have thought that the app tool would have done that for me. It didn't, so I restarted the Apache 2, and now it looks a little bit better. So let's go to DVWA and hit enter. And the username you want to log in as admin. The password is password. And we're still not 100% there yet. I'm going to let you guys go in just one sec. First thing you need to do, you need to click on Create Run Database. And when you do that, you should scroll down and see all of this information. If at this point you're good, it then redirects you to the login, admin, password. And you should see something like this. And you're ready for next class. If you're having problems, let me know. We'll pick this up for our next class. Otherwise, I'm going to stop and let you move on to your next class. If you're struggling with this, we'll have time next class. Jared, go ahead.
Did I miss a step in the config file? Because I'm getting a could not connect to the MySQL service.
Yeah, you forgot to use a PC. That's what your problem is. We'll take a look at it. I don't know. Did you do the apt? Well, here, let's go back to Notepad.
Like, I got up to the point where you were, where everything was matching. We were only missing the two things. I clicked on the create/reset database, and then I got the could not connect to the MySQL service. Please check the config file. And it says your database user is root. If you're using MariaDB, this will not work.
Okay, so yeah, you did miss a step. We had to edit the config.ic.php file. You may not have saved those changes.
That's what I was looking for. I missed that entire step. I'll do that now.
Okay, so that is being captured in this video. You can refer back to it. I'm going to save this and upload it into YouTube and then have a link in Learn so that you can take a look at it. But yeah, that's the thing. You either modify this so it matches your database config, or you modify your database config so it matches the configuration of the application. Either one. Any other questions? Okay.
I did that. Now I'm just getting unable to connect to the database.
Okay.
I assume I just need to restart Apache?
Maybe restart Apache, yes. If you haven't done the service Apache restart, if you haven't done this, if you've already done this once, you should be good. You also need to install the PHP MySQLi driver as well. Did you do that?
Yep, I have all those installed.
Okay, and did you do the service restart?
Twice now, yeah. Once earlier when we did it together, and once now. And it still cannot connect to the MySQL service.
Okay. When you upload, all right, so this is the next test. Anybody else needs to drop off, that's fine. The next test is to go to var www html dvwa and config. All right? And then check out head should work. config.inc.php. All right. Let's do head-20. Let's do 30. Fuck. The next thing is to verify by checking out the file that those changes have been pushed to your configuration on your server. Are they there?
Looks like there might be a typo, even though there shouldn't be. Give me 1 second.
Sure. You can use nano or vi to modify it on the server. Either is fine.
Yeah, I was using vi.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Vi is good.
There we go. We're good.
All right.
Now I can log in.
All right, so we'll pick this up next class, and we'll start taking a look at DVWA, and we're actually going to start attacking it in our next class. Any questions? Okay, get to your next class. I'll talk to you guys later.